Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy Seeley, president of Seeley Test Pros and LEAP, helping students to succeed in all kinds of tests from 8th grade to grad school throughout Ohio.
And I'm Mike Bergen, president of Chariot Learning, helping students with Test School and Life based out of Rochester, New York.
Between the two of us today, we have over 60 years of experience at the highest levels of the test preparation and supplemental education industries.
We both love to talk and learn about the latest issues in education, testing, and admissions. So let's get down to tests and the rest. The fascinating topic we want to explore today is strategies for the computer-based ACT. But first, let's meet our special guest, Adam Snoza.
Adam Snoza graduated from Creighton University and was a high school English teacher for 9 years in both public and private schools. He has spent 16 years in ACT test prep with Aim High Test Prep in Omaha, Nebraska, where he is the president, lead instructor, and curriculum developer, authoring his own 350-page instructional manual. He is also an AIM trainer for ACT in all 5 certification areas, working with teachers across the country on how to effectively teach the ACT test. In addition, Adam co-authored the 2021 update to the official ACT Mathematics Guide. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Adam, it is great to have you on the show. This is not your first time with us. In fact, you've been on the show multiple times. You started your tests and the rest tradition, talking about ACT math reporting categories back in episode 159. We did a profile of you in episode 249. And in episode 298, you came back to discuss why remote tutoring is here to stay. But you haven't been back in over 400 episodes, and a lot has happened in your life. So before we get into our fascinating topic, we would love to hear a bit about you, your practice, and all the amazing things you're doing right now.
So a lot of amazing changes have happened, I think, since that last episode. I think one of the bigger things is I went from lead instructor and curriculum developer to now I'm the owner of Aim High Test Prep. And the former owner is now working for me in his semi-retirement.
Mm-hmm. And seems thrilled to be doing it too.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. And it's such a wonderful thing to have him as a resource to help me with building the business and running business decisions by him. So it's been wonderful to have him by my side. And also since then, probably the most proud aspect of my test prep career is the relationships that I've built with nonprofits here in Omaha, working with organizations. We have nonprofit development organization called 75 North. They're working with improving North Omaha and building in businesses and education opportunities, working with Upward Bound. It's just been absolutely wonderful to help bring test prep to those that financially wouldn't have been able to otherwise.
I'm going to bring up one other accolade that isn't in your bio, and that is you are a board member of the National Test Prep Association.
Yeah, why are you trying to hide that, Adam? You're an amazing contributor to the organization.
I mean, exactly.
It has been a great honor it's not only serving and helping out our industry, but it's being recognized among such elite peers. Yourselves are included in that, of course, but having so many people value my thoughts and opinions so much so that they bring me on in a leadership position has just been a great honor. And so it's been a great year, my first year of serving, and I hope to have a couple more.
Yeah, it's awesome. Actually, obviously, Mike can attest as like former president to your good work. And I get to attest to it currently because we serve on the board together. And so I get to see you every week and see all the good work and things you're doing for the organization and really for test prep at large, which is awesome.
Right. It's true. And I guess time flies when you're having fun because you're actually on your second year on the board.
He's like, really?
Oh, I am. Yeah,
He's like, wait, time is really flying.
4 months into the second year, but yes.
Well, and the thing is, Adam, I can attest, I think now, like you're a fully fledged, engaged, you have your responsibilities. So you are doing the work, which is great, which we really appreciate for sure.
Well, thank you.
Okay, well, so now that we all know we are speaking to a leader in education, let's talk about a topic that is frankly a little controversial among us all.
You think so, Mike?
We're talking about strategies for the computer-based ACT, and that there's so many ways to answer that question because there are different platforms currently. There is uncertainty about what the future platform will be. In the first let's say, iteration of the enhanced ACT and what might be down the pike. So, Adam, can you kind of clarify what are the different formats in which a student may take a computer-based ACT? And what platform can they expect at each point?
So the one that most students are going to see is going to be what's called the PSI system, which for the sake of simplicity, we'll just call that the national testing system. So students taking the test on a Saturday on those national test dates, they're going to see one particular system, which will be a lot of the strengths and benefits because I think it's the superior system if the ACT is listening. But there is one other system that students should be aware of because it's slightly different and offers different resources ever so slightly. And that's TestNav. And for the sake of simplicity, we can just call that the state or district test. So that's if a student is taking a test during the school day and it's provided by the school, then they would take it using a different system that is called TestNav.
Don't you think it's more likely that students are seeing the TestNav, the in-school digital version, in that I think roughly 1 million students a year or so are taking the in-school ACT?
Actually, that's a good point, Mike. We forget about the fact that the volume of testers are actually in-school testers. You sort of, yeah, you're correct.
And that's where my experience is because in Nebraska, it is a statewide test, and a lot of schools have opted to administer it digitally. So if I'm working with a student, it's going to be the TestNav system. I haven't worked with that many students on the PSI system, although I'm familiar with it.
And it's funny you say that, Adam. The trend is going to a lot more school day testing is going to digital. We observed that this year, and I'm assuming we'll see the same trend next year. So it is, yeah, the computer is the way of the future, although it is, students do still have the option of paper, which is still on our national test dates, probably still far greater. I know ACT doesn't release data, I think, on that, but at least we know that for our purposes, we want to talk about what are some of the tools and resources students will have within this digital platform. And so can you talk a little bit about, what would you say are some of the differences that do exist between these sort of national platform, the national testing versus the in-school?
Sure. And so I would say it comes down to 4 basic differences that I would use or recommend for a student to use. The biggest one, in my opinion, is probably going to be the ability to hide your timer. I know a lot of students that will just get distracted, staring at the time, watching it whittle away, and it adds to the time. You're spending time watching your time. And if you're on that Saturday testing platform, you have the ability to mask the timer, and it only kind of pops back up if it's during the 5-minute warning period.
I want to interject once because I do want to give some reporting from the first release of the enhanced ACT. And what we do know is that the visibility of the alarm from the timer is not visible, meaning when the 5-minute warning goes off, it actually is not sort of like front and center. It's off to the side, in which case, if you're not really looking for it, you could actually miss the notification of the warning. So yes, there is a clock and you can see it or not see it, but I do want to sort of give a little be on the lookout for the timer because it's not going to be in your face.
And this is such a massive issue, right? Because
right.
As you were saying, Adam, some students might choose to hide the timer, but even if you don't hide the timer, if you're counting on that timer and you're not getting the traditional 5-minute warning from the proctor and you miss your warning,
like an audio warning is what we're used to.
You are in big trouble, right? There's no audio warning now. It's just a visual warning.
Right.
Which is understandable that they can't have beeping going on every workstation, but there's a problem. And I think educators and students need to work on how they're going to handle that aspect of digital testing, knowing that unless there's a change to the platforms, the timer and the warning will not be front and center.
And I just think that's going to come from training, just like working with a student with the 5-minute warning. 5-minute warning can disappear quickly, and students get lost in a question or they forget and then they end up leaving blanks. And
Right.
so a lot of what we do is train students to be aware or have a timer or have a watch. That way they can keep track of time better. It's just going to be a similar training mechanism. It's just slightly different.
Hmm.
So what's the next difference you want to share with us?
So the next one is it's there, but it's going to be dependent on the student or the tutor. It's the calculator option. So the big one is that the Saturday test only offers for the math section a scientific calculator, which is great for students that forget their calculator. And as a reminder to everybody that all students are allowed to bring their own calculator. They don't have to rely just on the provided calculator, which is going to be my recommendation for all of my students anyway.
Yeah.
But on the school day testing, they are allowed to use a Desmos calculator. And that can sound very, very powerful. And it is. It's just a hassle. How it pops up on the screen and it overlays on top of the question, and you have to reorient it and then turn it back on for every single question. It's tedious and time consuming to use and manipulate, where I would have a student just grab their handheld calculator that they bring and execute the same functions as they would using Desmos.
It's very interesting to hear someone who endorses a handheld TI or Casio or whatever
Mhm.
particular obscure model you prefer right now, Adam. But because so many educators are all in on Desmos and how powerful it is. Amy, I find that I'm recommending to my students that regardless of what calculator emulator the test platform provides, students should bring their preferred
100%.
handheld
I
and
agree.
use the different options. I mean, really, you have three options for solving. You have the emulator that's embedded in the platform, you have the
Mhm.
handheld, and then you have paper and pencil.
Yes.
And every one of those options is ideal for a different kind of problem.
Yeah. And I think, and one thing I think we all sort of teach is you have to be sort of savvy about when is it appropriate? When is it
Mhm.
necessary? When is it helpful? Or when is it maybe even ridiculous to be using a calculator? But I think it's great to know, Adam, at least that there are two different potential calculators that a student could have. And if they want to up their game, if they're taking a test on a Desmos calculator, they might want to practice with that if they're less familiar with it.
And especially if they are given a practice test, some of my school's students are given a test nav link to practice for their in-school test, and that's what they think they're going to get on Saturdays. So if they're accustomed to one calculator and then it's not there, that can be detrimental to
That
them.
is a flaw, right? If you're practicing, using the ACT website for an official practice test, it is a downside that you might not be practicing in the platform that you will
Mhm.
test in. So students
Right.
should be aware that there could be a difference there. How about other differences between the two?
Sure. So the other ones are a little bit simpler because they're quicker to discuss, and it's the practicality of a couple of the additional features. So one of them being the answer eliminator function. That's where you can cross off an answer to help with the process of elimination since you can't physically write on it. I find that on the school day testing, it can be a little clunky because you have to select to eliminate and then change it back to the cursor so you can select an answer. And that changing back and forth can be time consuming, especially the only time I've had students where I've recommended that they might do it is because their in school test was taken on a tablet. So using two thumbs was relatively easy.
You're actually mentioning one other thing that's worthy of note that we got reporting from for the new
Mm,
enhanced is that you have to be really careful to click on the answer on the screen because you might think you picked an answer, but it might not have like taken it if you're not directly on the bubble. So students need to be very cautious that they actually answer every question by seeing that it's recorded because they might think they clicked and it didn't. So that's one thing to be careful about, especially if you're clicking back and forth or, eliminating or whatever, like you said, going back and forth.
and the other one is similar. Just again, it's the extra clicks, it's the extra time consuming nature of it, and that would be highlighting. Not a huge advocate of using the highlighter feature, but on this the school day testing, it is clunkier in the fact that you have to highlight and then select your color after it. which is just adding another click. It's just clunky, but I
There's a
don't
fatal
recommend it.
flaw with the
Mhm.
highlighting feature, isn't there?
Oh, and we haven't gone there. You asked about
We haven't,
differences
he's
first.
jumping ahead to like
Oh,
question
I
number
mean, if we're
4.
talking about highlighting, let's get
I
into it, right?
that is my number one pet peeve. If I was to have the ear of someone at the ACT, that would be the fix that needs to be fixed. And that's the fact that if you're using the highlighter tool, most specifically in the reading test, that's probably the biggest issue is the reading test. Students that actually, heaven forbid, read the reading passage prior to doing the questions, which yes, I do recommend students do that. They can't use the highlighter feature because as soon as you move on to the next question, it disappears.
Which we
All of
should
the
note
highlighter go away.
is a very different interface than if you take the digital SAT. The digital SAT allows for highlighting to remain. So if students are going taking both tests, they have to realize that is different for the ACT.
Right.
And I think is a
Which, I
flaw.
mean, because the SAT format is one passage per question,
Correct.
whereas the ACT format is roughly 10 reading questions per passage.
Right.
So they don't
Right.
want to preserve all of your notes.
Yeah.
But I mean, if we're talking about where the quality annotation tools are, it's definitely in Blue Book and not in any of the platforms that ACT is employing.
Right.
Right. But that's important to understand. There is a highlighting feature. You can use it, but if you're expecting that your highlighting will remain from question to question, that's scrolling, whatever, it doesn't matter. It will disappear. So don't rely upon that as you're working. What other sort of things should students know?
So now going beyond the differences, I would say a couple things on like setup or procedures just to get started before we, dive into anything specific to a subject area. It would be some of the small things like making sure you have your color adjusted. So it can be very tiring staring at a bright screen for 2.5 hours or so. So you can change it to dark mode and have a black background with white text. Makes it a little bit easier on the eyes, and a lot of students use dark mode for a lot of their apps on their phone for the same reason. So you can set that. They're in different locations depending on what system you're using, but both of them have it. And the other one, which is a funny little tip that I give to my students because I've just seen so many students make this mistake, is reading the directions. Because the directions is its own slide and it's not like on a page. If you're on a paper, 99% of students are going to jump straight to question 1. They're not reading the directions. And if they were taught by somebody, they know you don't need to because you were told the directions beforehand with practice tests. But because it's a slide, because it's the first thing, I've had students that are reading the directions while their time is
ticking
away.
So
totally. And I'm like, okay, you see this? Immediately hit next. Like they have to be taught that, or otherwise they get stuck staring and reading something that's unnecessary.
Yeah, that's the lesson of test prep. This is the one time where know the directions in advance and be able to click right through them.
Right.
I want to shift to a different question. The ACT is a native paper test.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in-school tests, students do not have a choice about what format they take the test on, but national testing test takers do have a choice. They can choose digital, they can choose paper. In fact, in most locations, paper is the default option. You have many more locations.
Right.
Knowing this, why would a student choose the digital exam? What do you see as some of the benefits of taking the ACT on computer?
So I think some of the benefits kind of speak to the study that the ACT did back in 2020, where they found some of the benefits in the speed in which students can click a bubble. We've all seen students that take forever to bubble in because they have to like circle it first and then fill it in and make sure oh my gosh, and it's a perfect circle.
Meticulous, especially if you're a, kind of like meticulous kid.
And that's the high functioning kids where that time is going to be needed. And so that is much easier. While, yes, you talked about the radial button being difficult to select, but if you can get used to that, that's a lot easier than it is to fill in all those bubbles manually. Also having the timer physically there. So yes, I know it's in a different location and the warning doesn't really notify you as much as we would like. It's still there, so they have better control versus a clock on the wall and the 5-minute warning. They can go down to a 1-minute warning and have a little bit more time control, which also prevents, and this is again according to that 2020 study they conducted, fewer blanks. Because before you submit, it will warn you, hey, did you know you're about to leave a blank here? And you're like,
well, and
oh,
not to mention, you can flag questions, right? You can flag them. So even at that point, you go, oh, which are the questions I want to refer to, and kind of very cleanly like go back and forth.
right, right. Now, do those things outweigh the benefits of paper testing, the ability to annotate and the ability to see multiple math questions at the same time? Or science passages and graphs at the same time? I'm still going to say no. I'm still going to tell my students to take paper given that choice, but there are still benefits that students can enjoy.
I like the way you put that, Adam. I feel like there is a consensus among the three of us that all things being equal, the paper test offers more advantages. We didn't get into skipping passages, right? You want to skip a certain passage. There's no way to know on the computer where one passage ends and another begins on a section, whereas on paper, of course, that's easy. But there are good qualities about the digital test. I think the changing answer choices and things like that, that makes it really great. The issue, I think the final issue we should talk about is the fact that there is currently an abundance of practice material on paper for the ACT and limited digital practice tests, maybe one test in the TestNav format, and I think now one new enhanced ACT in the PSI format. Is that you can correct me on the platforms, but there's just not a lot of tests.
But they're still the same test.
One legacy ACT on computer and one enhanced ACT on computer using official material.
Currently, yes. And then the Wiley book will come out here in a couple of weeks, and then students will have access to an additional 4 practice tests. That won't increase the number of state testing formats, but it will increase the national testing formats, the PSI one that you mentioned, because that will likely be the format, or at least a mirror of that format will be offered in the Wiley book.
To be fair, the enhanced ACT or the in-school ACT in the 2025-2026 academic year will be the enhanced ACT.
Correct. Yes.
So ultimately, we're going to say in May of 2025, students should have 5 official enhanced digital ACTs.
I would not go out on that limb.
No, it's true.
There will be 5 official enhanced ACTs.
There's 4 that are available to students in Wiley, the book. Like they can use the online access code, and there'll be one that's available in like their ACT.
I'd probably say multiple. I don't know how many of the Wiley. I don't know if the Wiley test is going to be a repeat of the one on the.
It doesn't matter, but to practice in the computer format, that is where they will have the opportunity to practice at least 5 computer. Which is not to say there are going to be a lot of unofficial platforms, right, Adam, that offer ACT tests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and those other platforms, can be great resources for students if they need to go beyond those 4 tests. Absolutely.
When it comes to practicing for the ACT, should students who are taking a computer-based test only practice on computer?
In this interim, when we are working with 4 or 5, whatever the number is, whichever number of tests, I think that working with paper tests, working with the traditional, what's called the legacy test form, I don't think is necessarily bad in the content rehearsal. Having the ability 100%. To see a lot of questions. I mean, yes, is grammar going to decrease in its prominence in the English test? Yes, but if I'm using a legacy test, one of those old formats, that just means I get more practice in that content area. And when I switch over to the digital, which you absolutely should to rehearse, you'll be better rehearsed at it. So I think the legacy tests will become good content review, but maybe should be coupled with actual digital test review for format.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point. Is if you have 5 official ACTs in the digital format you can practice on. I think 5 shots at a computer test is enough to fully understand the interface. Like you're suggesting, these other tests, these legacy test questions are still valuable because we know the content isn't changing.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's just a priority of what is prioritized or deprioritized under this new format, but I don't expect massive changes in content or curriculum.
Yeah.
Adam, I know we've covered a lot. Is there anything else about strategies for the computer-based ACT we would be remiss in leaving out?
I think the biggest one is going to be the borderline excessive use of scratch paper. Because I think that
please clarify that.
It's because students will only think of using the scratch paper for the math test, and that might require a little bit of advocacy from the student side. That is not the rule. They are allowed to have paper during the entire test administration. So if a student wants to use paper during science to write down numbers because they're having to scroll between graphs, they want to write down a number and then see what they're comparing it against, use the scratch paper. There are a lot of reading tools and tricks to engage in the reading without highlighting that involve writing down keywords, or I had one student, Amy, I learned from you in a long ago discussion that we had about reading test strategies, and you talked about pre-reading, where you would look for line reference questions and go mark those in the passage. So you have kind of stop points within the passage. It's worked wonderfully for my students. Kind of feels like it's taken away when
you're on that digital.
Except I've had a student find massive success because all they did is they just clicked next until they saw a giant yellow highlighted section or a line.
I'll take this one, please.
And I would have them use the scratch paper. I said, write the first word or two of the paragraph where that underlined or highlighted section is in. And so then they have, let's say, 5 words marked. And so as they're reading through, they have those stop points. They go back to the first question, start reading through, and it works effectively the same way. But instead of it being a line reference that I put a bracket around, it's just I have a word that starts the paragraph.
It's funny. I used to teach passage mapping where you'd put some keywords next to each paragraph as you read. I feel like that's a good strategy on paper. If students are kind of trying to map the ideas, use that scratch paper and reading for that purpose.
A map of the passage, maybe even one sentence thesis, like something like that is really critical for paper. To our knowledge, are there any limits on scratch paper per student?
That we don't know.
The rules don't explicitly say. It just says scratch paper will be made available during the test. It doesn't qualify during which section of the test, and it doesn't qualify how many pieces of paper. It's just that it has to be returned to the proctor when the test is over, so you don't keep those notes for later, obviously. But I think it's going to take one, education to staff members that they don't limit a student to one sheet of paper, and also advocacy, students standing up and being like, no, this is within my rights of testing. I'd like you to look it up and confirm, because I know that this is allowed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's fantastic. Listen, Adam, we could always talk with you all day. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
If listeners would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
So they can reach out to me at my website, aimhightestprep.com, or by email, asnoza@aimhightestprep.com as well.
Awesome. We hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as we did. Be sure to join us for another fascinating topic and guest on the next Tests and the Rest.
Did you enjoy this episode as much as we did? Find expanded links and more for this and all of our episodes at our show page at testsandtherest.com. While you're there, be sure to explore everything the larger TestBright site has to offer, including real, expert, unbiased answers to the toughest admissions testing questions. Of course, we'd love for you to rate, review, and subscribe to Test and the Rest on your favorite podcast platform. If there's a topic or guest you'd like us to feature, just let us know and spread the word.